So welcome to Transform Gov, where we share real-life stories on how technology and data are changing the way public services are designed and experienced. In every episode, we go straight to the source, that is, the leaders who are making the calls and the teams getting it done. Transform Gov is part of the Ireland e-Government Awards, and it's brought to you in partnership with Accenture. And I'm Maeve Neefsey. Today on Transform Gov, we're back for part 2 with Marie Wallace. And we're looking at what digital identity actually means, but in practice this time, from service delivery to the economic impact. So Marie is Managing Director and Global Lead for Digital Identities at Accenture. So you're welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Good. So in part 1, in case you missed it, Marie gave us a really clear sense of where things are in terms of the shift from organisational controlled identity to individuals having a far greater control over their own data, and how that changes trust in the digital world. But let's bring this all back down to earth now, and let's talk about potential economic impacts, because you've had some big numbers behind that. So in fact, your report, the identity economy, it mentioned that the potential impact for Ireland could be up to 8 billion. Is that correct?
Indeed.
Okay.
It's an eye-watering large number, but I can assure you we've done work for other countries. It's a bigger number again. So this is just generally a very big number. Because if you...
Sorry, go on.
Because if you think about it, there's so much manual paper that flies around government, flies around private sector. You know, it's so cumbersome very often today. So anything that can be done to streamline that has a significant economic impact and value.
So on a kind of I suppose, a more nitty-gritty practical place, where do we see the value springing up in terms of what you see happening or what could be happening?
So just a quick sort of preamble. When you think about identity and we think about these documents, they're about individuals. So think about any time I have to share a document about myself. It might be my proof of my identity. It might be a passport. It could be my education when I'm getting a job, whatever it is. Anytime I have to share physical documents, they have to be looked at by a person, they have to be manually verified. It's very, very cumbersome and time consuming. But also think about organizational identity, because that's the other thing as well. Same thing with organizations when they want to onboard into supply chains, when they want to prove they are who they say they are. A huge amount of administrative overhead for companies. So what the digital identity and digital credentialing world tries to do is get rid of all that kind of that manual verification and just streamline processes by providing digital data that can integrate directly into a business process.
I suppose if we even think about what happens today in terms of how you deal with government, it could be you're getting married, it could be that you're getting a passport, whatever it is. You're often sharing the same information again and again with different organisations. So not only is it cumbersome in one encounter, but it's cumbersome across multiple encounters.
It's cumbersome. So there's a couple of really interesting points there. So it is obviously cumbersome. I use having a baby as I always like this example because it's a good example because in the Irish government and in all governments around the world are framing the government services around life events. And if I think about having a baby, like what does that mean? If you, from the government standpoint, you're registering the birth of a child, you might be getting some public, prenatal, postnatal services, but you also are doing something, you might be registering a child on your insurance, you might be, registering, like you're doing lots of other...
Your passport.
To add it, a passport. There's lots of these things that you have to do. Some of it's public sector, some of it's private sector. And it's the same sort of information you're having to share. And then there's all this verification that has to happen. So it's very, very cumbersome. But just one other thing I wanted to call out, because the other thing that people miss is also the efficiency from a human standpoint. So just imagine we have some governments that are really interested in personalised government services. So just imagine that I'm having a child and instead of me having to try and figure out what is all the things I should do, because I'm being able to share I have a lot of data on my device, it can make recommendations. It can identify I'm somebody I've got private insurance, so it means I need to know X, Y, and Z. Or maybe I'm a non-resident, so it means I might have to do something slightly different. So once you have more data to work with, you can actually make the services highly personalized. But again, this is why it's very attractive having data in your wallet, because you can now start to do things in a way that's highly privacy preserving. You're not giving the government, you're giving these private companies all of your data. So I think we're seeing personalization, we're seeing efficiencies and streamlining and the removal of paper are the big benefits we're seeing in this space.
And so how does digital identity, and I mean, I feel like holding my data and sharing it as I see fit, and what's ever necessary. How does that link in with preempting what I'm going to need, if you know what I'm saying? In this scenario where I'm having a baby.
Exactly. So there's different ways. What we're seeing happening in the world is you hear a lot of talk about LLMs. Everybody's talking about LLMs, large language models, and they're big models that's under the cloud. This is my personal opinion. What's even more interesting is SLMs, small language models. And what is a small language model? It's a model that runs on the edge of your device. It runs on your phone. So you can imagine I can have recommendation systems that are running on my device based on information that's on my device, not based on information that's sitting in other corporate or government silos. So this kind of completely changes what it means to have personal services and personal recommendations. We see this very often in the private sector as well, where people might not want to share health data, for example, with a private company, but it might be very important for a type of service you're getting for them to understand something about your health. So that's one example where we're seeing AI move out to the edge of the device. So data is moving to the edge in the wallet, and now AI is able to move out to the edge as well.
So that you're basically, again, you're in control of it, but where you choose to get some preemptive advice, perhaps around your health.
Exactly.
It can be, you choose to.
Yes, exactly.
But if you want to keep that private because it might, let's just say, for example, increase your insurance premium, you may not want to share that
exactly.
data.
The reality is it's given individual. Now, obviously, there's regulatory scenarios where you don't have a choice, but you have to share data. So if you want to get on a plane, you have to share your identity data. That's not an option. If you don't share it, then you just don't get on the plane. So sometimes regulation says you don't really have a choice. You have to share some information, but that's not always the case. So the idea, again, is about giving individuals greater flexibility and helping them understand where they don't have a choice. Yeah. Like, for example, getting into an airport, you have to show a passport or some sort of government ID document.
I mean, even when we think about it, if we move back a bit, some of the most basic things, which you probably still do, we do indeed, is to show your statement to prove who you are. And I always used to think that's mad. I have to black out, my balance. So it's incredible actually what kind of information we used to have to share. And even
things like utility bills just to basically prove your address. I mean, all that utility bill information is also being shared. So we are oversharing. And in a world where the companies we were sharing the data with couldn't really do anything with the data. But now where AI can do everything with everything, every piece of oversharing has a cost to you potentially. So that's why we need an ability to be able to share selectively. And this is kind of what this decentralized identity, what Europe is doing around EIDAS regulation is trying to do to help people selectively share what they need to share and only that.
Okay. Well, look, I think it's a good time to take our quick break because we've got some important people to give a message from, which is our partner Accenture. But don't go away. We'll be back in a couple of moments.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
So we're back after our quick break and I'm here with Marie Wallace from Accenture. So Marie, we're talking about AI and we're talking about identity. We're talking about the economic impacts of having perhaps digital identities. But is there, fraud is always, it's on people's mind, okay? So what actually improves here in terms of protecting people from fraud or protecting organizations from potential fraud?
I'm going to give you a very good and very concrete example. So, and we've seen in the press many different executives in different companies that have been deep faked. So they've had a video meeting which they thought was with the CEO of the company or something, telling them to do something. And the next thing, believe it or not, they accept that and they go transfer a large sum of money out of the company. So that's an extreme case. But the reality is deep fakes are very, very good. You can't trust that the person at the other side of the video, the Google chat or whatever it is indeed who they say they are. So one of the things that this digital identity allows you to do is to send a request to verify your identity. So I don't trust the image. I want you to cryptographically give me a handshake to prove that you are who you say you are. So that's one of the things that these digital identities allow you to do, allow you to prove cryptographically you are who you say you are. Sometimes it can be with biometrics because sometimes we find that companies really want to know, is this indeed Marie? That's sitting at the end of the camera. So if, for example, I was going to do my driving test, and I was going to do it remotely instead of having to schlep into a driving centre. You'd want to make sure that the person doing the driving test is indeed the person
who you think they are,
and not somebody else. So we're seeing a lot of cases where companies and governments are looking to digitize a lot of these physical processes. And that means allowing people to do things remotely. And that is perfectly fine. It just then means you need that extra level of verification that the individual at the other side is who they say they are. Now, one thing that's very interesting to note is these techniques, these computer techniques, cryptographic techniques, are actually much more reliable than the human eye at actually verifying that the individual is who they say they are. So there is some real benefit to doing that.
And in terms of just physically, okay, so I am about to, I'm on a video call with my CEO. He tells me to transfer 55 million, if only. Yeah. So I'm about to transfer it. How do I physically check in this new world that whoever is at the other end of the camera is?
So what you'd have in that example, and we actually have seen this happening in the telco space and even in the video meet space, you would have the video, the companies have to add this feature, but you might have a feature, confirm you are who you say you are. And what happens is the application sends what you call them proof requests. It sends a request to the device, to your mobile phone. So if I'm sitting here, it will send a request to my mobile phone and will ask me to share something. It might ask me to share my image, to be sure that that's the same image that's on the screen.
Yes.
It might ask me to share some other, or it might just share the cryptographic handshake.
Okay.
So that's really how it works. So in a way, it's like second factor authentication, but it can include biometrics. Okay. And that's just a feature that we're seeing increasingly. We're seeing telecoms looking at having that. How can I get rid of these annoying spammy text messages or indeed with deepfake spam calls? So how can I use that? So this is a new feature that we're seeing more and more companies looking to add into their software.
And are there particular areas across things like healthcare, education, and travel where you see the biggest operational gains?
So if we look at how we came to the magic 8 billion number, it wasn't by, fluke. So what we did there is we identified the 11 highest volume life events. And what we did, so we really worked from the bottom up to say, okay, of these life events, so getting your passport renewed or, getting a loan or registering something. So what we did is we took these 11 key life events, and this is using public, data, looked at what the volumes were. We used data on the estimation of what that would have from a cost saving. And that way we were able to build up. So I bought these notes because I don't remember all the numbers. But for example, like 54 million in savings was estimated per year on things like loan and mortgage applications.
Okay.
Like 200 million cost savings between 2027 and 2030 would be things like passport, registration, pensions and some loans. So different areas had different, and also we looked at, just to give you some numbers on the volume. So for example, healthcare, there's 60 million plus prescriptions every year that are issued. And I don't know if anybody who's had an elderly mother in hospital and you've had to answer 10 different times what her current prescriptions are. Like so 60 million, there's millions of health visits, 150,000 school enrollments, 13 million plus pension payments, 35,000 deaths registered. So you can kind of get a sense of the volume. Yeah. And just imagine you can take the manual paper, manual verification, and you can just streamline these and make it really digital to digital, the efficiencies that you could realise.
And in terms of Ireland, are we well positioned, do you think, to take advantage of the opportunity? I mean, I know we're part of Europe, so we're going to have that framework.
Yes.
But have we anything unique, do you think, that gives us a kind of...
So and I'm going to, because we do have some really, really interesting numbers, and let me just quickly... So I think there's a few things that are fairly interesting. So obviously we are part of Europe, so we have the benefits of the European. But there's a couple of other things which I didn't realise with the research. Our digital literacy is higher than the average in Europe. So we're 71%, whereas the average Europe is 54%, which means our people are comfortable with technology, comfortable with digital. We already have My Gov ID that about 2.7 million verified users are using.
Yes, Larry was in telling us what a success it's been.
Indeed.
How it just continues to increase.
Indeed. And that's for the authentication part I raised. We just need to add the verification piece there. So we have a good foundation to start with that. And then the other couple of things I want to call out is there's really good policy alignment with what I've just been describing here and what we have we've got, the Programme for Government 2025, where, to quote it directly, we want to be the EU centre of expertise for digital and data regulation. and we want to fully realise the economic potential of the digital and AI revolution. So like our policies are lined up really well with what we're seeing around this wallet infrastructure and what this could deliver. And then the one other thing I would say that's kind of interesting is we also have this action plan on competitiveness and productivity. We want to add 300,000 jobs by 2030. That I think is really interesting because this is what this is trying to do. I know on one hand you think it's making things more efficient, is it taking away jobs? But it's creating you have these new types of services that we can deliver. And also our companies in Ireland can start to export these types of services and these types of capabilities outside of Ireland. So I think this is very aligned with the government priorities.
Okay. And I suppose there's always practical steps you have to take, right? Because, we might want to, I'm not too rude, but you might want to build a lot of homes, but it hasn't happened. You might have a strategy and a framework.
That is.
So what do you think are the practical steps that we should be looking at?
So what I would say is, so the good thing about the EIDAS regulation is it goes live at the end of this year. It's not a choice. It's not an option. Some governments I know are running a little bit behind and they probably are going to ask for an exception. But by the end of this year, every government in Europe is supposed to provide its citizens with wallet, with trust infrastructure, so that they can start to take, and a year later, private sector companies have to adopt it.
I know that we spoke to Dr. Tony Scott from the OGCIO. I mean, and he was concerned about the legislation and the legalities around this. Is that all built in to what's being released in terms of the EU?
So I'm not a lawyer, so but my understanding is that the EU regulation has been regulated and ratified by Europe and by obviously all the member states. And it does cover the legality of, yes, a citizen can request what and can get call it the PID, the personal identity document. And companies then, a year later, the high assurance company like banking, whatever, have to accept it. So my understanding is that is in the regulation. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know all the bits and bobs.
We just have to get a lawyer in.
Indeed, we need to get the lawyers in. But I think the thing is, at least the EU has done some of this forward thinking about how you use it. And one of the quick thing I would say that's really interesting, the other thing Europe has done is they've invested billions. And what they've done is over the last several years, and these are still running, they've done lots of pilots with private sector companies. So they've shown how you would use this for eSIM registration when getting a mobile phone, how you would use it for healthcare, how you would use it for your driving license. So they've validated this with companies across Europe. So we know this works. Is it all going to work from day one? Probably not. But it is going to happen. And we already see this. Governments are implementing this. Some are a little bit ahead of others, but Ireland should be in a good position to lead in this. And again, by the end of the year is our deadline. Hopefully we'll make it to get our wallet out there for citizens to use if they want to.
And in terms of what could derail it, we talk practically, we can talk about what you think. If I'm going to implement this tomorrow, what we should be doing as a state, but are there things that might derail it as well?
I mean, I think the one thing that I'm concerned about maybe isn't the right term. I think we need to really engage with citizens. My concern a little bit is that we as in the broader technology community have been working on this for years. And we've been designing it to protect citizens, but I don't think we've been doing a very good job communicating this. I don't know how many people walking on the street know that the EIDAS regulation is going to go live at the end of the year. And we can ask for a wallet and we can demand to have a digital ID and we can use that potentially for crossing borders instead of using passports. So they probably don't know that. So one thing I think is, I'm a little bit worried that there could be some kickback from people because they're nervous. And that's sort of my biggest concern right now, because the thing that would be really sad, the whole reason that this has been designed is to try to give back agency and control to citizens. But at the same time, the digital world is scary at the moment with AI and everything. So that to me is probably the thing I'm most concerned about. Could derail things, the political side of things. Technology-wise, I think the technology is well understood. We're already seeing it rolling out across the US. Nearly half the states in the US have a mobile driving license program, which is a decentralized identity. So we're seeing other regions rolling this out. Australia is also making really good progress in mobile driving licenses. So that's, I guess, will be my one niggle.
But the campaign needs to be behind it to communicate.
We need...
One, you want to even know you can have it. And the other is that they have to make sure that the
They feel comfortable.
At the other end can accept it.
The service, and people feel comfortable. They understand what this is going to mean to them, and they're not nervous because this is about protecting citizens ultimately and allowing them to get into a digital society in a way that's going to protect them. So we need to make sure everybody is comfortable with that, and we haven't missed it. Won't. And the other thing I would say, the regulation probably isn't perfect. There'll be issues that need to be resolved. We need to work through that, but. First of all, we have to make sure our citizens are all on board.
And in terms of you talked earlier on about why Ireland is positioned well to be a leader in this space. What are the benefits to us being leader?
So I guess what I would say is that you can. So we have a particular culture in Ireland. We feel about privacy in certain ways. You don't want to be on the back foot and to have these regulations or have these standards kind of pushed down on you, and you just have to live with them. You want to be the ones that are pushing them. Now, in the case of Europe, because we have done this Europe-wide, there's been a lot of protections in place. But I think it's really important for governments to not just be on the back foot, not just reacting to these standards and adopting them, but helping to shape them in the interests of what's important to the country and important to citizens in Ireland. So that's one of the reasons I think governments really shouldn't be too passive about this, because I think it is important that we ensure that our priorities as a country are also reflected in how these standards and how the regulations and everything is evolving.
So in other words, get stuck in is coming anyway, and then we might be able to shape it to suit ourselves.
Exactly. Yes.
And in terms of, if we look down a little bit further down the scope, and you're looking about 2 years from now, how do you think we'll be doing things differently in terms of both from the public sector perspective, but from our citizens? I mean, I can imagine, but what do you see coming?
So I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm going to hope that the rollout of EIDAS goes well in Europe, and that we do see adoption broadly come 2027, and that by 2020, the end of 2027, we do indeed see companies like banks or whatever just accepting the wallets. If that's indeed the case, what I anticipate, we'll just see much more streamlined services. Our wallet will become much more a part of our daily life. And this is going to take a little bit longer than 2 years, but maybe 2 to 3 years. It really is like our vaults. We have our bus card is in there. We have our passport is in there. We have our driving license in there. We have in all the, our education credentials are in there. So we have everything we need to participate in anything that might be needed in this physical, digital, smart world. That's what I hope we'll see over the next 3 to 5 years, and that citizens are really empowered as a result of that. The second thing I would say, I would hope we'll see, instead of Stripe is a great success story for Ireland, I'd love to see, some really billion-dollar companies coming out of Ireland that are building these really exciting AI solutions that are highly privacy preserving, that are really, centered around the individual, centered around giving them control and access, and around this concept of the wallet or the digital vault. I'm hoping we'll see that sort of happen as well in the kind of this SME space.
And do you think there'll be any resistance from private industry who currently have lots of information about it, perhaps information they don't necessarily need?
I guess I would, and this again is not specific in the research, this is kind of my opinion, but if we think about, and actually some of this is in the research, we called out specifically the benefits to SME. If you think about in an AI data-driven world, he who has the data calls the shots. And right now you've got a lot of big companies that have all the data, which puts small companies at a significant disadvantage, because if it's all about having personalized services, but I just don't have access to the data I need to personalize.
Yes.
I'm kind of at a disadvantage of the big guys. But if we democratize it and individuals can hold their data and can choose how they want to share their data, it's actually a real benefit to SMEs. So I would argue we have seen a little bit of resistance from maybe some of the bigger companies who and the companies who make money on verifying your data. They're third-party companies, and that's their entire reason for being. I think it's going to be hard for them. But I think for the small companies, they don't really have a major data, so this in a way should be good for them. And also it should eliminate a lot of processes and overhead that they have, which percentage-wise is probably a bigger hit on their business than it would be for a bigger company.
So if you'd like to explore this in more detail, we've shared the full report, the Identity Economy Report, in the description on YouTube and also across all of the podcast platforms. You'll find a direct link there to the report. Are there anything else that you might think is in that report that we should be sharing?
No, I think it's there's a lot of numbers in there, so I didn't cut, but I think it's an interesting read. It tries to cover the numbers behind it, but also tries to explain a little bit more about what the architecture looks like. So I think it's a good read. It's not a very hard read. So hopefully people will find it interesting.
So it's a good economic impact of all of this. If we take advantage of it.
Absolutely, if we take advantage of it, exactly.
Well, look, thank you so much for coming, Marie. I really appreciate it. It was really clear and practical look at what it means and the real impact for Ireland.
Thank you so much. It was lovely being here.
And for anyone who's listening and hasn't heard part 1, please have a listen, because it's going to bring in an understanding of what this whole identity is and digital identity and the wallets. And of course, this particular session was more about the practical implications. But if you enjoyed this episode, there are lots more episodes that you can listen to on whatever podcast channel you use of Transform Gov. And if you like this, please share it with your colleagues. So finally, before we finish, a quick thank you to the studio team as well. Studio manager Peter Rice, video editor Neil Horn, sound engineer Lee Brennan, and videographer Richie Ryan. So thanks for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Transform Gov.